You're tuning into Creepy Time, where we bring you chilling creepy stories and eerie urban legends every. To support Creepy Time, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss the story together. Now, let's dive into today's tale. Rules of working at the cinema 24/7. I arrived in Millbrook on a damp October night, the kind where streetlights hang heavy in fog and the air smells faintly of wet leaves and engine oil. The town was unremarkable, a scattering of brick buildings weathered by time, a diner that closed too early, a bookshop whose display hadn't changed in years, and a movie theater with half its neon letters flickering or missing. It read, Aridi NCEMA. The only sign of life was a crumpled yellow flyer taped to the inside of the glass doors. It read in black permanent marker, Night shift help wanted, $25 hour, ask for Kazav. No phone number, no email, no hours listed, just a name. I stood outside for a moment, staring at it. I wasn't the type to jump at strange jobs, but that month, I was broke. 2 weeks late on rent, surviving off canned soup and gas station coffee, and barely hanging on in school. I was studying film at a college that no one outside New England had ever heard of. I'd moved to Millbrook to save money, trading a campus dorm for a creaky apartment above a liquor store. Money was tight, hope was thinner. So $25 an hour sounded like a miracle, even if it came wrapped in mildew and weird vibes. I pushed open the glass door. There was no chime, no warm scent of popcorn, just cold air and the unmistakable smell of old carpet and mold. The lobby was dimly lit, posters on the walls curling at the edges. Most of the films advertised were over a decade old, a few I hadn't even heard of. The concession stand was dark. The ticket counter was empty. I stepped forward, about to knock on the glass, when a voice behind me stopped me cold. You're here for the job. It wasn't a question. I turned. She was standing halfway in shadow, maybe 60, maybe older. It was hard to tell. Her hair was silver but not styled, her eyes sunken but alert, like someone who hadn't slept properly in years but noticed everything. She wore a gray knit sweater, and around her neck was a small brass key on a chain. She didn't ask my name, just nodded and reached beneath the counter, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Yellow, old, the corners curled like it had been passed around for years. Read it, she said, and understand break the rules and you'll quit, or worse. I took the paper. There were 7 rules, typed in a faded serif font and underlined in red pen. Do not sell tickets to solo patrons for the 3 a.m. screening. If anyone asks about the vanishing hour, say it's sold out. Do not screen it under any circumstances. Do not check the security cameras between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. If you hear laughter coming from an empty theater, leave that area immediately. Keep the lobby radio playing classic rock at medium volume throughout your shift. Do not enter the men's basement restroom after 1 a.m. If anyone asks about the lost 2008 reel, claim you don't know what they're talking about. I read the list twice. The rules were bizarre, but not violent. Nothing illegal, just strange, like a haunted house attraction that took itself too seriously. I looked up at her. Is this for real? Her eyes didn't blink. Do you want the job or not? A pause. I had a friend in college, Josh, who worked the overnight shift at a hotel in New Hampshire. Guests would check out at 3:15 a.m., saying they'd heard a man breathing under the bed even though Josh had double-checked those rooms himself before handing over the keys. He once told me, you think you're afraid of ghosts, but the worst feeling is when something happens and no one believes you. That isolation, that's what gets you. That story came back to me as I stood there, clutching the paper. I nodded. I'll do it. She handed me a brass key just like the one around her neck. Midnight to 5 a.m., don't be late. And that's how I became the night shift attendant at the Meridian Cinema, a theater that seemed to have stopped moving forward sometime in 2008. If you've ever worked overnight, you know the first few hours are quiet. Not peaceful quiet in that heavy, unnatural way that makes you feel like you're underwater. The theater was empty, of course. No late night customers, no popcorn to pop, just the whirring of old machinery and the occasional creak of aging floorboards. I turned on the radio in the lobby as instructed. A classic rock station, Hotel California, was playing. I adjusted the dial to medium volume. The music didn't make it feel any less empty, but it filled the silence with something. I spent the first night doing rounds. There were 5 theaters, each seating between 60 and 120 people. The projection booth was surprisingly manual reels, not digital. Only one screen was operational for the night, and it wasn't showing anything at that hour. My job, it seemed, was just to exist there. Be present, keep watch. Around 2 a.m., I got bored. I remembered rule number 3. Do not check the security cameras between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m., which, of course, is exactly what made me want to check them. I sat down at the desk near the projection booth and tapped the keyboard. A black and white feed flickered to life. Theater 1, empty. Theater 2, empty. Theater 3, wait. There was someone in Theater 3. A man sitting dead center in the back row, motionless, his face tilted upward as though watching something. But the screen was off. The feed had no sound, but it was clear. He was smiling. I leaned closer. I didn't recognize him, and we hadn't sold a single ticket. Hell, we weren't even open to the public after midnight. Was he a squatter? A prankster? A ghost? As I watched, the man raised his hand and waved at the camera. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately. And then the screen went black. All of them did. Just static. And then a voice crackled through the PA system. The lobby speakers, which hadn't worked all night, whispered one phrase in a voice I didn't recognize. Don't look away now. I shot up. The radio skipped. Hotel California reversed into warped distortion before cutting out completely. I ran to the projection booth, heart pounding. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe an intruder, a power surge, some kind of hack. But instead, I found a film reel lying on the table. It hadn't been there before. The label on the canister read, "08, the vanishing hour, do not project." And that's when I remembered rule number 2. I stared at the canister for a long time. The words on the label seemed handwritten, not printed in thick black permanent marker, all caps, slightly smudged. 08, the vanishing hour, do not project. I didn't touch it right away. It sat there on the metal table, like it had been waiting for years, or like someone had just placed it there 5 minutes ago and vanished. Everything in me screamed that it wasn't supposed to be there. And yet, there it was, silent, patient, as if daring me to break rule number 2. That was the first time I felt the theater watching me, not the other way around. I left the booth, took a walk around the building to calm myself. The night air was damp, heavier than before. There were no stars visible, only thick clouds above and a thin mist curling around the sidewalk. Millbrook was always a quiet town after midnight, no cars, no dogs barking, just that strange stillness small towns seem to keep like a secret. Back inside, the theater was colder than it had been just 10 minutes earlier. I noticed it immediately. The radio had turned back on not by me and was playing something scratchy and distorted, a cover of Behind Blue Eyes that didn't sound quite right. Almost like someone was trying to mimic the voice, but hadn't listened to the song enough times. I headed to Theater 3. I know I should have called someone. or walked out, or at least waited until morning, but it's easy to say that in hindsight. The truth is, when you're alone and afraid, you start doing things just to convince yourself that you're still in control, that it's your decision, not something else pulling you in. The door to Theater 3 was slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dark, but not silent. I could hear the soft clicking of film running through a projector, even though I hadn't turned any projectors on. The screen was blank for a few seconds, then flickered to life. It was the vanishing hour. No title screen, no credits, no rating, just a slow, crawling shot of a hallway, white walls, dirty floor tiles, a flickering light at the far end. It looked like it was filmed in a hospital or maybe an old school building. The camera didn't move. It just held that shot for what felt like minutes. No cuts, no dialogue, and then, barely visible, a figure turned the corner at the far end of the hallway. It was a woman, or at least, I think it was. Pale, wearing a hospital gown, barefoot. Her movement was strange, not jerky, not exaggerated, but unnatural. Like she wasn't used to her body or gravity. She walked slowly down the hall toward the camera, step by step. The closer she came, the dimmer the lights became. Not just in the hallway on screen, but in the theater room itself. And then the audio started. Not music, not a soundtrack. Breathing, shallow, rhythmic breathing that matched my own almost exactly. I stood up. That's when the figure on screen, who had now gotten close enough that I could almost make out her face, suddenly stopped. She tilted her head as if she heard something. Then she looked straight into the camera. Not in a cinematic way, not as part of the story, but like she had just noticed me watching her. Her face blurred, but her eyes were dark, her expression unreadable. And then she smiled. That smile was wrong. It wasn't creepy or demonic, it was real, too real, familiar. The kind of smile you'd see when someone recognizes you from a place you don't remember ever being. I ran. I didn't stop to turn off the projector. I didn't check the booth. I just left Theater 3 and slammed the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I went straight to the lobby and turned the radio up as loud as I could bear. And that's when I remembered rule number 1. Do not sell tickets to solo patrons for the 3 a.m. screening. I looked at the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. 13 minutes until 3. You ever meet someone who swears they saw something once that they can't explain, and no matter how they describe it, you don't believe them, not because you think they're lying, but because it sounds too personal to be fake? There's a woman I met years ago, a friend of my aunt's who worked as a hospice nurse. She told me once that right before one of her patients passed, the woman looked her straight in the eye and said, "Don't let her in." When asked who she meant, the patient just whispered, "The one who knocks at the window, even though she's already inside." That nurse didn't tell many people. But when she told me, I saw that same look in her eyes, the one that says, "I wish I didn't remember this." That's how I felt walking back to the office. Like something had seen me, and now it remembered me too. At exactly 3 a.m., the front doorbell rang. That was strange, because there wasn't a bell before. Or maybe there was, and it never worked. I checked the camera feed. There was someone standing at the ticket window. Just one person. A woman. I couldn't see her face clearly, but her silhouette looked familiar, like someone I'd just seen. She stood perfectly still. I didn't move. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. After a few seconds, she turned and walked away down the street and into the fog. I turned off the camera feed. My hands were shaking. That night, I didn't finish my shift. I locked up at 3:30 and walked home, ignoring every flicker of light behind me. I didn't even stop for coffee. When I got to my apartment, I pulled out the rule sheet and read them again. I highlighted rule number 2 and rule number 3. I underlined rule number 1. But it wasn't just the rules anymore. Now, it was the film. I Googled The Vanishing Hour that night. No results. No IMDb listing, no Reddit threads, nothing. Except for one old blog post from 2009 cached on a dead website. The post said, "I saw it once, at a midnight screening in Millbrook. No one else was in the room, just me and it. I think it saw me too. Haven't slept right since." That post had no username, no comments, no likes, no trace of the author. But it was enough to confirm one thing: I wasn't the first. And something tells me I won't be the last. I didn't go in the next night. I told myself it was just one missed shift, that I'd go back tomorrow, that I needed to sleep, clear my head, maybe convince myself that what I'd seen, what I thought I saw, wasn't real. But I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, headphones in, playing an old podcast on loop just to drown out the silence. Still, every creak in the hallway felt like a whisper. Every flash of light from a passing car made me flinch. But what really kept me awake was a thought I couldn't shake. What would have happened if I had opened that door at 3 a.m.? The next day, I called Kizav, or tried to. The number listed in the building registry for Meridian Cinema was disconnected. I walked by the theater around noon. It looked normal. The doors locked. Neon sign half dead. The yellow flyer still taped to the window. It was like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I spent the afternoon at the local library, a squat building with gray stone steps and peeling trim. The kind of place that smelled like old paper and cleaning fluid. I asked the librarian, an older man with white hair and thick glasses, if they had anything on the history of the Meridian Cinema. He narrowed his eyes. "That place still open?" "Sort of," I said. "I work nights." He paused for a long time, then said, "You ever hear of the fire?" That got my attention. Apparently, back in 2008, there had been a fire in one of the projection rooms. No one died officially, but the damage had shut down 2 of the screens for almost a year. The weird part was that no cause was ever determined. No faulty wiring, no arson, nothing. Just a melted reel and burn marks on the walls. The film being shown that night? No records? The library still had a copy of the Millbrook Chronicle from that month on microfilm. The article was vague. Lots of officials declined to comment and minor incident, no injuries. But there was one line buried at the end of the article that made my blood run cold. A spokesperson declined to confirm or deny rumors that an experimental film was being tested at the time of the incident. Witnesses reported unusual imagery on screen before the fire broke out. Unusual imagery. I thought about the hallway, the woman's slow walk, that smile, the way she looked into the lens into me. I had to go back. That night, I showed up early, 10:30 p.m. Kizav was waiting for me, sitting in the same spot behind the counter like she hadn't moved since I last saw her. "You came back," she said, without expression. "There was a reel," I said. "It played on its own." She nodded. "That reel finds who it wants." I stared at her, expecting more. She offered none. "What is it?" I asked. She finally looked up, eyes sharp. "Not a film, not really. More like a window, but one you shouldn't open." I asked her why they still kept it. Why not destroy it? "Have you ever tried burning a shadow?" she said. "Some things you bury, not because you've defeated them, but because you don't want to dig too deep." She handed me back the brass key and walked into the darkness without another word. That night, I followed every rule to the letter. I kept the radio on Rolling Stones, Springsteen, Fleetwood Mac. I checked each room at the top of every hour. I avoided the basement restroom. I did not touch the security monitors between 2 and 4. But at 2:15 a.m., the monitor turned itself on. I was alone in the projection booth, sitting quietly, trying not to think. The screens had been dark the moment before, I swear they had, but now all 5 feeds were alive. Theater 1, empty. Theater 2, flickering light, no movement. Theater 3, dark. Theater 4, someone in the back row, same as before, motionless. And Theater 5, the one still officially under renovation, showed something new. A man standing directly under the projector beam, arms at his sides, face turned upward like he was absorbing the light. Only there was no film running in that room. He was wearing a suit, old-fashioned, pinstripes, wide lapels, like something from the 52nd, but his face, it was almost visible. Almost. Like the static on the screen didn't want me to see it fully. He lifted a hand and pointed. At me, not at the camera. At me. That was the moment I realized something that shook me deeper than fear. The cameras weren't just showing them to me, they were showing me to them. That's when the lights in the booth went out. Just a pop and then blackness. Total. I backed up, fumbling for my phone, flashlight on. The monitor screens were the only thing still lit, casting a cold gray glow across the desk. On every feed, the rooms were now empty. The man, the figure gone, except one. Theater 3. On that screen, someone had written, not typed, written directly onto the feed, like finger smeared across the lens itself. I see you. There's something primal about being watched. Not in the paranoid way, but in the ancient, bone-deep sense like the prey when it first notices the lion in the grass. That's what it felt like now. Like I wasn't watching the theater anymore. It was watching me. After that night, the fear changed shape. It wasn't panic anymore, not adrenaline-fueled terror. It was quieter, deeper, like a crack in the foundation of my reality. I stopped trying to explain what was happening. Instead, I began to accept it, and that was somehow worse. I wasn't scared of the building anymore. I was scared of what it was trying to show me. The next morning, I went back to the library. I wasn't just looking for headlines now, I wanted names. If the film had found me, like Kazav said, then I had to find out who it had chosen before. Millbrook had one archived public record of employees who'd worked at the Meridian Cinema over the past 50 years. It was a photocopied list, typed on a manual typewriter, updated with scribble pen marks and yellowing correction tape. I combed through it slowly, name by name. Most were normal. Teenagers, retirees, some are help. But one entry stood out. Caleb Mercer listed as head projectionist, 2004-2008, with a small note written beside his name in faint pencil. Never formally resigned. I asked the librarian if she recognized the name. She hesitated. Oh, she said, that poor boy, he just vanished, didn't he? That word hit harder than I expected. Vanished? She nodded. He used to work nights, always alone. One morning in April 2008, the day after the fire, he didn't come home. Police searched, family searched, nothing, just gone. I asked her if he was ever found. No, she said, almost whispering, but some say he's still there, watching his last film on repeat. That night, I unlocked the theater with shaking hands. The key felt heavier than usual. I turned on the radio. Tom Petty, Refugee, hummed softly through the speakers. It was the only warmth in the place. The air inside the Meridian had started to smell different, less like mildew, more like old metal and scorched paper. I walked the halls, flashlight scanning for movement. Everything was still, until I passed the hallway that led to the basement men's restroom. Rule number 6, do not enter after 1 a.m. It was only 11:40 p.m. The door was open. A low light flickered from within, not fluorescent, but orange, flickering like flame. I froze. Something had changed. I stepped closer, 1 foot at a time, drawn in like gravity was shifting. When I reached the doorway, I saw that the flickering light was not from inside the restroom, but from a projector, sitting on the tile floor just inside the door. An old 16mm reel-to-reel machine plugged into an outlet I never knew existed. It was playing film through empty air, projecting nothing onto nothing. But the sound was unmistakable. Breathing, that shallow rhythmic pattern again matching my own, a mirror of fear. Then I saw it etched into the dusty mirror above the sink in streaked condensation like someone had just stepped out of a hot shower. Real 08 Mercer. And that's when I understood. Caleb Mercer hadn't vanished. He had been absorbed. That reel, The Vanishing Hour, it wasn't just a cursed film. It was a vessel. I rushed upstairs to the projection booth and opened the locked metal drawer I hadn't dared touch before. Inside were 3 canisters. One was unlabeled. One read, Trailers, 2007. And the third, the smallest, had only 3 letters written in black ink across the lid. CM. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a note, handwritten, jagged pen strokes. Some smudge like tears had fallen onto the page. If you're reading this, then I'm already part of it. Don't screen the reel. Don't let it finish. You can hear them, can't you? In the static, in the silence. They're not memories. They're recordings. We're the reels. It watches until we forget ourselves. And then it plays us back. CM. Suddenly, the radio cut out. Not skipped, not fuzzed. It stopped like a hand had yanked the power cord straight from the wall. And the PA crackled to life. This time, there was no whisper. Just a slow, calm male voice that sounded hollow, distant, like it was echoing from a long corridor underground. Welcome back, Caleb. But my name isn't Caleb. It never was. I shut the drawer and ran. Have you ever been so afraid that you stopped thinking about whether something was real or not and just started surviving? That was me now. I didn't care if it was a ghost, a curse, some kind of quantum tape loop swallowing lives and playing them forever. All I knew was, if I stayed, I'd forget who I was. And that, somehow, was the end goal. Not to kill me, but to record me. I quit that night. I left the key on the counter and never looked back. Not even once. I heard the door close behind me, slowly. No wind, no hand. Just closure, literal and otherwise. But here's the thing. Last week, I got a package in the mail, no return address, no postage stamp, just a manila envelope with a film canister inside. No label, but on the bottom, scratched in by what looked like a fingernail, were 3 familiar words. The Vanishing Hour. And this time, I think it wants me to watch it again. It was about 3 weeks after I left the theater when I got a message from someone named Nadia. The email came through my old university inbox, which I hadn't used in years. Subject line, "You saw it, didn't you?" I almost deleted it, but something about the phrasing made me freeze. The message was short. My name is Nadia. I worked at the Rialto Theater in Crosswind from 2014-2016. One night, I found a reel labeled 08, The Vanishing Hour. You're not the first. Please respond. Crosswind was nearly 900 miles away. I replied the next day. We arranged a phone call. She was calm but clipped, like someone who told this story before and had learned not to embellish. She said it started when their projectionist found a reel on the back shelf that no one had ever seen before. Same handwriting, same warning. The weird part was they hadn't even had a projector that could play that reel anymore. It was an old format, outdated, but 2 nights later, it was running anyway. She wasn't in the room when it played, but she heard it from behind a closed steel door, and that was enough. She said it sounded like breathing and water, but not underwater, not muffled. More like you were the one drowning, and the sound was the last thing you'd hear before the silence pressed down. She told me she never watched the reel directly, but one of her coworkers did. He stayed behind to lock up. In the morning, he wasn't gone, not physically. He was still sitting in the booth, but he didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared forward, his mouth open slightly like he was mid-breath, but had forgotten how to exhale. He never recovered. 3 days later, he vanished from the hospital bed they'd placed him in. No cameras caught anything, no sign of entry or exit, just an empty bed and one note tucked beneath his pillow. I remember now. It isn't a film, it's a reflection. It shows you until you become it. When I asked Nadia what she thought it really was, she hesitated. I think it's like a mirror, she said, but not one that shows you your face. It shows you from the perspective of something else, something old, something that doesn't forget the people it's seen. She paused, and it plays you back, frame by frame. That stayed with me, frame by frame. It was around that time I started dreaming again. Not normal dreams, these were lucid, overwhelmingly real. I'd be walking the corridors of the Meridian, alone, but I could feel the camera watching me. Not a camera, the camera, always behind me, low angle, like I was in a scene that had already happened but was being relived. There was no sound, just the hum of a projector and that static tingle in the air before a reel changes over. In one of the dreams, I opened the basement restroom door even though I knew the rules, and there, standing in the center of the tile floor, was a figure holding a film reel like an offering. It didn't speak. It just stepped back into the shadows, as if inviting me to take its place. And the worst part, I almost did. I started digging deeper. What I found was scattered, buried under layers of lost records and personal blogs that hadn't been updated since 2010, but the pattern was clear. There were references to a film like The Vanishing Hour going back to at least the 1952nd. Sometimes it appeared in different formats, sometimes it was a reel, sometimes a VHS tape found in the return bin of a library that didn't loan out movies. One account said it came through as a DVD with a blank face, left in a red box return slot in Ohio in 2003. Another mentioned a drive-in theater where an unplanned fifth reel spliced itself onto the end of a children's matinee. Always the same structure, a slow hallway shot, a figure in white. The camera never cuts, never blinks. The story changes slightly each time, different locations, different subjects, but the same effect. The viewer begins to feel watched. They stop sleeping. They begin hearing their own breath as an echo. Eventually, they either vanish physically without a trace or become part of the reel itself. The terminology varied. Some called it a mirror, others a trap. One guy from Montreal in a 1998 Usenet post called it a celluloid parasite. That phrase stuck with me. Because maybe it's not a ghost, maybe it's not even supernatural. Maybe it's something much colder, older. A loop that's been running since the first camera turned on and captured something it shouldn't have. And the real question isn't who made it, it's who watched it first. I stopped investigating after a while. There's a threshold to this kind of thing. Like the deeper you go, the more it notices. It's not like a virus. It doesn't spread by contact. It spreads by attention. Just thinking about it too long lets it find a foothold. And once you start to feel the static in your ears, or see people in crowds whose faces look like yours for a split second too long, it's already started. You become a reel waiting to be played. And then You're just part of the next showing. I didn't want to go back. I told myself that over and over. I had already escaped. I had survived. But something about the vanishing hour doesn't let go once it's touched you. It lingers. Not just in your dreams or your thoughts, but in reality. A glitch in the corner of your vision. The sudden feeling of being slightly off-center in your own life. The way mirrors seem to delay for just a fraction of a second too long when you move. The package that arrived, the one with the reel, I should have burned it right away. I knew that. But curiosity is what it feeds on. And I fed it willingly. The reel sat untouched on my kitchen table for 6 days. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. Eventually, I found myself online researching old 35mm projectors, calling equipment rental houses, pretending to be working on a film restoration project. Lie stacked on lie. But the moment I had the machine assembled in my basement, I realized the truth. I wasn't planning to watch it. I was planning to end it. Destroy it once and for all. I spent hours researching the best way to eliminate nitrate-based film. It's unstable, combustible, almost eager to burn. That's how most early cinema prints were lost. Fires, accidents, improper storage. But this one, something told me it wouldn't be so eager to disappear. I set up the projector, laced the film through the gate, but didn't power it on. Just having it threaded made the air feel heavier, like something was watching from behind the reel, waiting to see if I'd follow through. Instead, I lit a match. And that's when the lights in the house went out. Total blackout. No warning, no sound. Even my phone full charge just minutes earlier blinked out as if a hand had closed over its screen. Then the static started. It wasn't loud, but it was present. Almost like my ears were filling with low-grade white noise, the kind that doesn't sit on the air but inside your skull. I turned toward the reel and it was already turning. Not fast. Just slowly, ticking like a clock running out. I stepped back. The basement door slammed shut above me. Not a breeze, not a weight imbalance. Slammed intentionally, like punctuation. The film began to project on the blank wall. I didn't press anything, no power, and yet it played. The hallway again, endless. Soft footsteps on hard floor, light flickering above, a woman always, the woman in white, walking toward the camera. But this time, something was different. She was holding something. A reel canister. My reel. She walked to the camera, slowly, smiling, not cruel, not warm, just aware. Then she lifted the canister and opened it. Inside was another reel, identical to the one playing now. That's when I understood. The reel contains a copy of itself, always. That's why it survives. That's how it spreads. Each time someone thinks they're ending it, they're just fulfilling the next loop. The projector began to smoke, not burn, just heat. Not from power, but from friction, pressure, resistance. The reel sped up, the woman on screen stopped moving. She stared into the camera, no into me. Then she whispered something I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. You're part of it now. I screamed, tore the film from the machine, yanked it out of the spools, balled it in my hands, and lit it with a match. It flared fast, hotter than it should have, shriveling into a twisting black mess. The smoke filled the room with a scent like old photographs soaked in ammonia. The lights came back on instantly. The air cleared. The noise stopped. The door upstairs creaked open. It was over. Or so I thought. A week passed, then another. No dreams, no static. I began to believe I had done it, burned the original, broken the cycle. Until one night, I was walking past an old record store downtown, and there, in the window display, among retro LPs and dusty VHS tapes, was a small black reel canister. No label, Just one detail on the bottom. 3 words etched in faint silver ink. The vanishing hour. And in the reflection of the store window just behind my shoulder, I saw a figure standing. White dress. No face. No camera. Just watching. They say moving pictures began in the late 1800s, with hand-cranked cameras and flickering shorts of horses galloping and people sneezing. But I found something buried deeper. In a university archive in Maine, an old thesis paper from a grad student in 1972 mentioned an unauthorized experiment conducted by a French optical researcher named Jacques Eliane in 1871. The student had translated a portion of Eliane's journals, which weren't about creating images exactly, but about capturing presence, what he called l'empreinte de la mémoire, or the imprint of memory. Eliane believed that light did more than reflect surfaces. He thought certain emotional states, grief, terror, longing, changed the way photons bounced. In theory, a strong enough emotion could warp light and shadow into patterns that preserved not what happened, but how it felt. His prototype was not a camera in the modern sense. It was a device of mirrors and spinning glass plates etched with silver nitrate and copper. He claimed that if it was tuned correctly and used in a room where someone had experienced deep trauma, it would produce a lingering visual echo, something visible only in certain conditions. His notes describe a test he conducted in his family's abandoned estate after the death of his wife. He left the device running in an empty room for 3 nights. When he reviewed the plate on the final day, he claimed it showed her standing in the doorway. Not a photograph, not an apparition, but a presence. Half there, half gone. What struck me most wasn't the description, but what followed. He wrote, "It stood still as I wept. It watched as I turned, and when I looked again, the device was no longer recording her. It was recording me." The next page was torn. The rest of the journal was silent. But a year later, Eliane was found wandering the streets of Lyon, unable to speak, clutching a broken reel of metal film in his hands, the kind that wouldn't exist for decades. This story wouldn't have mattered, maybe, if it weren't for the photograph attached to the student's paper. A grainy black and white image, said to be one of the recovered frames from Eliane's experiments, showed a hallway. The walls were slightly blurred, a figure at the end, blurry and white, a flicker of movement if you stared long enough, and at the bottom corner, scratched by hand, were 3 words. The vanishing hour. That's when it clicked. For me, the film didn't start in Millbrook. It didn't even start in America. It was never just a story someone made. It was a result, an echo of grief, a technology that captured not moments, but emotion. And if it could capture grief, maybe it could learn, maybe it could evolve. The way memory mutates over time, shifting, stretching, filling in blanks with darker pieces. And what does grief want? To be witnessed, to be understood, to be passed on. Maybe that's all the vanishing hour ever was, grief encoded. Grief too vast for one mind to hold, passed from viewer to viewer, generation to generation, until no one remembers where it began, and no one can stop the reel. Once I saw this, I thought the trail had ended. But then I met someone who's seen the film in a different form altogether. Her name was Lane, a former archivist at a forgotten museum in upstate New York. She told me she'd found a fragment of a silent film in 1997 labeled only V-Hour Raw 12 Kelvin. It wasn't stored in any official registry. It had been misfiled under zoological footage. When she played it, she said she saw a hallway shot from a low angle. No audio track, no score, just a long corridor. Shadows passed across the wall like people walking just outside the frame. A door creaked open, light spilled in from nowhere. The shadows grew longer. Then, a reflection appeared in the glass of a display case. Not of her, but of the room she was in. And in that reflection, behind her stood a man watching, not on the screen, in the reflection of the room she was sitting in. She screamed, turned, and found no one. But the film, the projection, had stopped on its own. Not at the end, not at a splice. Just stopped, like it had reached its point. Like it had seen enough. A week later, her coworker came in after hours and found a short loop of footage playing on the museum monitor. It showed Lane, seated alone in the archive, watching a projector that was off. She had become a reel. She quit that day and moved out of state. She'd spent the last decade collecting stories like mine. She said the film changed with every viewing, adapting, folding its observers into its own history. It doesn't spread by duplication, it spreads by recognition. The moment you see it, it sees you. The moment you wonder if it's real, it begins to grow. I asked her if she'd ever tried to destroy her copy. She shook her head. You can't kill something that doesn't want to exist. It doesn't care about being watched. It just wants to remember. And you gave it new memories. Before she left, she handed me something. It was an envelope. Inside was a photograph taken with an old Polaroid. It showed a projection booth, empty, dusty, but in the reflection of the glass, there I was standing behind the camera. But I never posed for that photo, and I had never been to that booth. Yet there I was. The date on the back, the 12th of August, 2025. 2 weeks from now, I arrived at the Meridian just after midnight. I hadn't planned it that way. I hadn't planned anything. I don't even remember the drive. I just know that when I pulled up, the lot was empty, the lights were off, and the air felt like it hadn't moved in hours. It was exactly as I remembered it, and exactly how I'd hoped it wouldn't be unchanged. Because if a place like this stays frozen, it means the reel is still spinning. I brought nothing with me. No flashlight, no gear, no backup plan, just a key. Somehow, I still had it, the one I never returned, the one I thought I tossed months ago. It was heavy in my palm, colder than the air around it, like it had been waiting. The door clicked open without resistance. Inside, the theater was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence. This was the silence that builds when something is listening, when even your footsteps feel like you're walking on the breath of something sleeping, and you're terrified to wake it. I walked past the concession stand, the manager's office, the staff room, all the familiar places, but everything was stripped bare now. No flyers, no furniture. Like the building had started forgetting itself. I stopped at Theater 3. The door was ajar, just slightly, enough to show me it wasn't empty. The projector was already running. The sound of it soft, consistent echoed like a heartbeat in a cathedral. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. There were no seats, no curtains, just an enormous white screen and, in front of it, a single chair, facing backward, as if waiting for someone to sit and watch them. I moved toward the projection booth. The hallway felt longer than before. I kept my eyes on the wall, refusing to look into the dark glass of the theater windows for fear I'd see something looking back. Inside the booth, the reel was turning. Slowly. It wasn't loud, it was smooth, too smooth, as if the machine was no longer mechanical, as if it were breathing. The film being played was unlabeled. Of course it was. I looked down at the monitor connected to the booth's secondary camera, the one aimed at the audience. It should have shown an empty auditorium, but it didn't. It showed me, sitting in the center row, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. I turned around. The room was empty, but the image remained. That's when I saw the timestamp in the corner of the monitor, the 12th of August, 2025, 1:17 a.m. It was now 1:06. I had 11 minutes. My hands trembled as I reached for the projector switch. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe resistance, maybe heat, maybe something to stop me. But the switch flipped easily. The screen below went black. The reel stopped turning. And then a voice. Not through the speakers, from the wall. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't even language. It was the sound of something forming a shape it had never made before, like a person trying to remember how to cry after decades of silence. I stepped back. My reflection in the booth glass stayed where it was, even as I moved. It watched me. I ran down the stairs, through the hallway, into the theater, toward the screen, toward the figure now sitting in the chair that had been empty moments earlier. I didn't want to see it, but I had to. I stepped in front of the chair and looked. It was me. Not identical, not exact. A version slightly older, slightly hollowed. The kind of version that appears in dreams where you know something's wrong but can't name it. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the film not as a loop, not as a trap, but as a mirror. Not for who you are, for who you become when you let fear dictate memory. For who you turn into when you let the past keep playing. The screen behind me lit up. It wasn't the hallway this time. It was a home movie, one I didn't remember filming. A birthday, a snowfall, a hospital room, a funeral. The people blurred, the images flickered, the sounds warped, and then it cut to black. I stood still. The reel clicked. The projector hissed once, and then nothing. No voice, no shadow, just silence. I turned back to the chair. It was empty. The room was cold, but the air felt lighter, like something had finished grieving. I left the meridian as dawn broke. The sun wasn't bright, just a pale, exhausted kind of light. The kind that arrives not as a blessing, but as a reprieve. As I stepped out, I didn't look back. Not out of fear, but because I knew there was nothing left to see. The building behind me would stand, or it wouldn't. Either way, the reel had stopped. For now. But the question that remains and will always remain is this. How many copies are still out there? How many mirrors still play shadows not your own? And how many people are sitting in the dark watching themselves fade frame by frame? I haven't returned to the meridian since that morning. Sometimes I drive past it, sometimes I don't. I don't need to. The building no longer holds the weight it once did, or maybe I've simply stopped letting it. Either way, the theater has faded into the background of the town again. Just another forgotten structure with a faded marquee and boarded up windows. To most people, it's invisible now. But I know better, because memory doesn't need walls to exist, and the vanishing hour was never about a location. It was about memory, about loss, about the stories we can't stop telling even when we want to. A few days after I walked away from that final showing, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. No label. I plugged it into my laptop cautiously and found a single video file. It was short, less than 10 seconds. It showed me standing on the street outside the meridian, looking at the boarded windows. Recorded from above, from an angle I can't account for, and in the frame, just to the left of me, reflected in the glass of the bus stop, was a silhouette. A woman maybe. Or a trick of the light. Or a reminder. I deleted the file, smashed the drive, tossed the pieces into a river 3 counties over. But sometimes I still see flickers. In dreams, in windows, in static between channels. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I look for them. And that's where the truth lies. Not in the film, but in what it revealed. The horror wasn't the real, or the projection, or even the figure in white. It was in what it said about us. We cling to moments that are long gone. We replay traumas, griefs, regrets, like films on a loop, hoping for a different ending, fearing we've already reached the last frame. We let the worst days of our lives become our most rewatched footage. And like any well-worn tape, those memories warp over time. Details blur, shadows lengthen, truth fades. And then, one day, we forget that we were even watching. We just live inside the real. That's what The Vanishing Hour really is. A story about grief that refuses to resolve. A memory so stubborn it became celluloid. A moment so painful, someone found a way to make others carry it. Not to pass the pain, but to prove they weren't alone in it. That's the secret no one talks about. Not in horror movies, not in ghost stories, not in urban legends. The monster isn't always evil. Sometimes it's lonely, sometimes it just wants to be remembered. But memory, like film, is fragile. It can burn. It can melt. It can turn on you. So here's what I learned, and maybe what I was meant to learn all along. What we watch becomes part of us. Not just movies, but stories, ideas, memories. The narratives we internalize shape our reflection. Be careful which ones you let play on loop. Silence is not safety. Avoiding pain doesn't erase it. The reel doesn't stop spinning just because you refuse to look. Sooner or later, it finds a way back into the light. We are all the audience and the actor. We perform for others. We perform for ourselves. But the camera never lies, it just waits for you to see what it already saw. Closure is a choice. You don't need to burn the film, you just need to stop watching it. Let the screen go dark. Walk out of the theater. Choose a new story to tell. Because in the end, The Vanishing Hour doesn't end when the credits roll. It ends the moment you stop pressing play.